Psychology reveals that people with few or no friends aren't flawed, antisocial, or emotionally broken. They're often wired in a way that makes shallow socializing feel exhausting, artificial, and strangely pointless. And that misunderstanding creates a quiet kind of pain. Because when everyone around you seems socially busy, connected, and certain, it's easy to assume that you are the problem. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if having few or no friends isn't a sign of social failure, but the result of a very different psychological makeup? Today, we're going to explore 5 rare traits that are commonly shared by people who have very few close relationships. Not traits that make life easier, not traits that guarantee happiness, but traits that fundamentally change how connection feels, how trust is built, and why most social environments feel draining instead of nourishing. This is not a video about superiority, and it's not a justification for isolation. It's an explanation. Because when something has a name, it stops feeling like a personal flaw. 1. Deep authenticity. People with few or no friends often have an unusually strong sense of authenticity. They don't just prefer being real, they feel deeply uncomfortable being anything else. For them, social interaction isn't a performance. It's an expression of identity. That means small talk often feels hollow. Polite exaggeration feels dishonest. And social rituals that involve pretending interest, agreement, or enthusiasm can feel strangely violating. This doesn't mean they judge others for playing along. It means they can't easily do it themselves. So while many people adapt their personality slightly to fit different social contexts, deeply authentic individuals tend to experience that adaptation as self-betrayal. And over time, this creates a pattern. They start withdrawing, not because they dislike people, but because they dislike pretending. The cost of this trait is obvious. Authenticity reduces social compatibility. But the benefit is internal coherence. They know who they are, even if fewer people get close enough to see it. 2. High standards for relationships. People with few friends tend to have very high relational standards. Not unrealistic ones, but non-negotiable ones. They value loyalty, consistency, emotional maturity, and mutual respect, and they are highly sensitive to imbalance. If a relationship feels one-sided, performative, or emotionally careless, they notice it quickly. And once they notice it, they can't unsee it. This makes casual friendships difficult, because many social bonds are built on convenience rather than alignment. Shared spaces, shared routines, shared history. But high-standard individuals look for something else, emotional safety. And when that safety isn't present, they'd rather be alone than subtly harmed. This is often misunderstood as being too picky or too closed off. But psychologically, it's a protective adaptation. They've learned, often through experience, that proximity without respect is more damaging than solitude. 3. A self-reliant mindset. Many people with few or no friends develop a strong sense of emotional self-reliance, not because they don't need connection, but because they learned early how unreliable it can be. Instead of outsourcing emotional regulation to others, they learn to process internally. They think things through. They reflect. They self-soothe. They don't need constant validation to feel grounded, and they don't instinctively look to groups for direction or reassurance. This often leads to enjoying solo activities, deep focus, long periods of independent thought. But it also creates distance, because self-reliance reduces urgency for social reinforcement. And without urgency, social effort feels optional rather than necessary. This isn't emotional coldness. It's emotional autonomy. 4. Deep thinking and sensitivity. People with few close relationships are often deep thinkers with high emotional sensitivity. They process more information, not just intellectually, but emotionally. They notice tone shifts, subtle inconsistencies, unspoken tensions. Crowded social environments overwhelm them, not because they're shy, but because their nervous system doesn't filter aggressively. Everything comes in. That's why surface-level interactions feel draining. They're taking in far more than they're expressing. They crave conversations with depth, meaning, ideas, truth. And when those conversations aren't available, socializing feels like mental noise rather than nourishment. This trait can look like introversion, but it's more precise than that. It's hyperceptual sensitivity. And while it enriches inner life, it narrows social compatibility. 5. Selective vulnerability. People with few or no friends tend to be very selective about emotional openness. They don't share quickly, they don't trust easily, and they don't confuse familiarity with safety. Often, this comes from past experiences where vulnerability wasn't met with care. So instead of closing off entirely, they become deliberate. They watch patterns. They assess consistency. They wait. This means relationships take longer to form. But when they do, they are deep, stable, and loyal. Access to their inner world is earned, not granted by proximity. This trait is often mistaken for emotional distance. But in reality, it's emotional precision. When you combine these traits, authenticity, high standards, self-reliance, sensitivity, and selective vulnerability, a pattern emerges. It's not that these people are incapable of connection. It's that most modern social environments are mismatched to how they're wired. Fast connections, low commitment, high stimulation, minimal depth. For someone built for meaning, trust, and emotional integrity, that environment feels empty. So they step back. And from the outside, it looks like loneliness. But from the inside, it often feels like waiting for the right conditions. Having few or no friends is not proof that something is wrong with you. But it also doesn't mean you're destined to be alone. It means your nervous system, values, and psychology require different forms of connection. Fewer, slower, deeper. And once you understand that, the shame begins to dissolve. Because what felt like a deficit turns out to be a difference. And differences don't need fixing. They need understanding.